cherished expectation. Yeah, it's a dream come true for me in the realization of a long cherished expectation in enhancing the capacities of YEEs. My great appreciation of the resource persons who willingly accepted our invitation to devote their valuable time, expertise, and energy to join us for building the capacities of these young and emerging evaluators. Dr. Shivakumar is Development Economist and Policy Advisor. I'm so happy that you consented to do the opening remarks. With your long experience in the government and outside as well, I'm sure you will keep the pace for us. Mr. Chelladurai Solomon, our chairperson currently, for accepting to do a presentation on the basic understanding of the concept of evaluation, which will lay the foundation for the sessions today. Chella, thank you. We have Dr. Rashmi Agrawal. He is co-founder and co-leader of Evaluation Community of India, co-chair of the Inter-Regional Initiative for the Professionalization of Evaluation, a very much expected kind of anticipation, for coming forward to elaborate the role of young and emerging evaluators in the process of evaluation. With her experience again in the public sector, in the government, and in the various non-governmental organizations in India and the region, I'm confident that we can expect a very meaningful presentation from her. In this connection, I admire the commitment of Dr. Anuruddha Brahmachari, Head Research Operation, Lead Kriya University, for accepting to moderate these sessions. As always, you have always stood up to challenges. So thank you, Anuruddha, for being with us. Yes. Can I hand over to the moderator? Anuruddha?
Thank you. I'd request everybody to put off their videos, because as some of the participants are experiencing a bit of slow internet connections, and that would help everybody to listen in and understand. And when you are speaking, the people, our presenters, they can put on their video, and which is easier to understand, and then they can see and understand easily. Thank you, Malikaji, for giving this opportunity to reach out to the young evaluators and talking to this and a training program. And one of the first things that sort of attracted me to this program was that, all right, this is for training. So it is just not another workshop or just not another one. It is another, at least a chance to learn something, or even I or anybody else in this room, when they hear experts like that, those who are sort of slated to speak today, you learn something. And with Dr. A.K. Shivakumar speaking, Chelladurai speaking, and Rashmiji speaking, all three of them which come with so much of depth of knowledge of government, non-governmental organizations work. So it's always good to hear them. So without further ado, I will be introducing the first speaker today, and he is Dr. A.K. Shivakumar, a long, years of practice in the development sector, in health, nutrition, basic education, you name it. He has sort of contributed immensely. And, I'm not going into his illustrious careers with UNDP, starting off with various centers of knowledge which he created and various reports he contributed to, something like the Human Development Reports, who is an active writer and contributors to those reports. And also, at very key governmental positions where he sort of redrafted and recrafted the whole governmental programs in child health, nutrition, and all those programs. And the most important thing, what he brought to those insights of the program was the lens of M&E. How to understand the program, because how to go out, use evidence to better programming. And those have been very interesting contributions from Dr. A.K. Shivakumar. Sir, I request you to come and share your keynote address and help us unpack this evaluation and learning a bit further, and give us we all have an opportunity to hear you and learn from you today. Dr. Shivakumar.
Thank you so much, Anirudh, for that very kind introduction. And thank you also for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts on this occasion with so many young and emerging evaluators. I shall make 3 sets of comments. To start off, I want to make a few observations on the context of evaluation that you are entering as young evaluators. Next, I want to talk about 3 critical questions facing the field of evaluation. And finally, I want to flag essential features that should be embedded into any evaluation exercise. So let me begin by highlighting 3 features of the context that really enhance the need for evaluation. The first is that there is growing disillusionment across the world with the blind pursuit of economic growth. There is no doubt that the world has benefited from globalization and from becoming more closely interconnected, gaining access to better goods and services, and getting better informed thanks to new technologies and new media. Economic growth has also contributed to dramatic improvements in standards of living across the world. However, the increased production of goods and services has not necessarily translated into enhanced capabilities for people. One of the old human development reports, this was the 1996 Global Human Development Report, had argued very forcefully that the conversion of economic growth into human development is not automatic. And the report had gone on to identify many types of failures, the failure to connect economic growth with an enhancement in the quality of people's lives. And I'm just listing 4 of them, which are so obvious when we look at not only South Asia, but across the world. The first is the phenomenon of jobless growth. And I think everywhere around the world, you find that there is economic growth, and that is not necessarily accompanied by an increase in jobs. So it's really, at one time, there was economists were concerned over often debating the idea of full employment. And sadly, nobody talks about full employment with decent jobs, and we are just fixated on accelerating economic growth. The second is voiceless growth. When growth is not accompanied by greater participation and a deepening of democracy. In fact, if you don't have a decentralization and devolution of powers from the central or the union government to state governments to district level and eventually to village level institutions of governance, growth cannot really be sustained. Third, and I think this is where the COVID pandemic has also revealed the futility of futureless growth. It's a term coined by the concern of environmentalists with how modern means of development are destroying nature and the planet. And both nature and planet are being sacrificed in some sense for the sake of economic growth. And the last failure that we observe across the world is ruthless growth, when growth is accompanied, as in many countries today, by growing inequalities. And this is extremely worrying. Sadly, what we find in the world today is a rising north within the south and a rising south within the north. The second observation about context is that the COVID-19 pandemic has really exposed the shallowness of development strategies that many countries have followed. The pandemic has exposed the fragility of human lives, the precariousness of human lives, the high insecurities in the lives of people. Poor health plagues the lives of millions who do not have access to affordable and appropriate health care. The promise of universal health coverage still remains a dream. Most countries, as I said, are far from assuring citizens decent jobs. Most countries have failed to provide good quality education to children. They've also failed to provide universal social protection, which was very obvious when the pandemic, during the lockdowns caused by the pandemic, we saw millions of migrant workers, informal sector workers, really left with no sources of livelihood. Food and nutritional insecurity prevail in many parts of the world, plus there is growing environmental threats. So essentially what the pandemic has done, and I think this is where evaluation becomes critical, is to re-examine the role of the state. The truth is that despite growth, governments have done little to empower people by offering protection against downside risks or enhance their capabilities and build resilience. It is apparent that the state has failed to fulfill the guarantees assured to people in the constitution of their countries. The third feature of context, which is extremely important for evaluators to recognize, is that governance is becoming increasingly complex and extremely difficult as more and more people are beginning to demand accountability from governments. The media has been playing an important role, but with new media, digital media, and also the control of media houses by corporate interests, it's not very clear what the role of the media could be in the future. At some level, thanks to the television, the other half now knows how the better half lives, especially during the pandemic, when we saw so many people, at least in countries like India, walking for miles with no support to get back to their villages from the cities in which they were making a contribution. These visuals are completely, are embedded in our minds and images are embedded in our minds forever. Citizens are also becoming increasingly aware of their rights and entitlements. There is growing awareness, and there is also growing public restlessness. And I think this is an opportunity for evaluation to acquire a new meaning and address this public restlessness that we are observing by providing evidence to say what is happening or what is not happening. Let me move on to the second part, where I want to list 3 questions that are critical for the future of evaluation, for evaluations to be useful and influential in transforming people's lives. The first question has to do with evidence. How do we improve the quality of evidence? I think for people in my generation and most of us who are speaking today, we have been complaining about the very poor quality of evidence across different disciplines. But we've not been able to make a breakthrough in many instances. And that's why when I'm talking to young evaluators, I really feel that this is an extraordinarily important area for you all to focus on. I was chairing a global commission that was looking at violence in childhood. And part of the problem when you're looking at an issue like violence is that it is underreported. Because most of the record in India, for example, is only if you go and file a police complaint, then it comes into the official statistics of the National Crimes Research Bureau. But most instances of violence go unreported. And so when we're looking at the evidence around how to prevent violence in childhood, we found there's so little available. We don't know at what age it peaks, what is the definition. The definitions are varying. We looked at 200 odd published studies. In fact, the evidence when the gold standard seems to be that you have to publish in some refereed journal. We came across some 200, 300 articles, but when you try to screen them for quality and comparability, etc., it will come down to about 10 or 12 evaluations that you can dip your hands into to see what works and in different contexts. And what was also disappointing was that 95% of the evidence came from North America and Europe. That the kind of evidence that is needed in our countries of the South was extraordinarily limited, partly because we don't have a tradition of publishing in these refereed journals, but even otherwise, there are lots of opportunities today, thanks to new forms of publications for young people to really write, publish, and bring what they find into the public domain much more systematically. In terms of improving the quality of evidence, of course, you cannot help but address the issue of RCTs, randomized controlled trials. I think there is a great belief that randomized controlled trials, the evidence that you get is of high quality. I think it's important for us to remind ourselves that RCTs correct only a statistical bias or a sampling bias. They strive for statistical precision, but many of the other biases that are inherent in any kind of a survey still continue. For example, who funds the survey is a big factor. Many times I find in India that the Ministry of Health will hire an agency to conduct an evaluation of a health program. So obviously there is a vested interest if the person who is implementing the program is also paying for the evaluator. So like even when you're coming to international agencies, you will find the same kind of issues. So there are also, by the way, investigator biases. So many of us have our own preconditioned leanings, and so the way we pose questions or the way we write down responses are also conditioned by our own individual biases. And there are respondent biases. So whether you ask the husband or the wife or some other member of the family, you are going to get different responses. So there are lots of complex issues that have to be dealt with when we're talking about the nature and quality of evidence. And now with COVID-19, we've found that many of our traditional methods of data collection are not working. So there's a lot of reliance on phone surveys or online surveys, which again biases evidence in extraordinary ways. So it's really important for us to focus in anticipation of future emergencies, what kinds of methods should we use to get more real-time evidence and evidence that can be help with decision making. I say this because, this cliche post-truth era, lack of sufficient evidence gives room and power to false claims, trumping the truth. And in the post-truth era, we find that assertions repeated several times outweigh objective facts. So you just have to keep telling what whatever lies you want to say, you repeat it 100 times, and that's the evidence that is believed by people. There's also this effort to brand experts as useless, conceal the truth, hide the realities. So I think how we improve how we improve evidence is fundamental to the future of evaluation. This brings me to the second question: how do we improve our quality of our understanding of reality? And what is reality is a big question, because unlike in the physical sciences, in the physical sciences, there is only one reality. So for example, if you're standing here and you observe a tree at a distance, the tree looks very short. But when you go approach the tree becomes very tall. But regardless of what you saw, whether it's a short from a distance or long, the reality is the tree has the same height. Similarly, in a temperature, some people might find the air conditioning too high, some might feel the air conditioning is too low, but the reality is that the temperature is uniform across the room. But that's in the physical world. But when you come to into the social spheres and social world, there are multiple realities. And this is what Professor Robert Chambers repeatedly tells us, that you have to look for multiple realities, because what you see is not what you get. So you might be standing here and looking at the railway tracks, and you might say that, oh my God, in the distance, I can see the railway tracks are merging. But that's not the reality. And so it becomes extremely important to break through illusions of equality. And I want to give you one illusion of equality that economic growth has really helped. So today, if you come to a slum, if you come to New Delhi and you pick up some young men from the slum and you pick up young men from middle-class families and put them in a line, you will not be able to say who's coming from where, because they're all wearing the same kind of t-shirts and blue jeans and sneakers that your children wear and the children in slums are wearing. So visually, it is very difficult to understand there's an illusion of equality, because there's a convergence in the space of commodities. Even poor people are eating Maggi noodles, unfortunately, which rich families and middle-class families are serving to their children. Young girls and young women in slums use the same shampoo that a film star is advertising, because they are now sold in sachets. So there's a false sense of equality, an illusion of equality that is created in the space of commodities, but certainly not in the space of opportunities, because there's such a divergence today between the opportunities available to our children and the opportunities available to people belonging to disadvantaged communities. Carl Sagan once said, there's a famous quotation, of course, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So we really, in this field of evaluation, you have to look for injustice, you have to look for inequality, and you have to look and you research. And therefore, when Robert Chambers in the opening remarks said, whose reality are you really talking about? it's the reality of people who don't have voice. It's the reality of the people who don't have representation, who are not powerful enough. So really, we have to make a pitch to ensure that we capture the voices and perspectives of different underprivileged groups in society. This also raises a simple question of objectivity. Sometimes evaluators are told you have to be very objective. And I've often wondered, what does objective mean? And objectivity means a position from nowhere. So that means I should have no bias. And I find that in evaluation, that's really not a good norm to use. So whenever somebody says evaluators have to be objective, I say, yes, of course you have to be objective, but your evaluation has to be biased. You must have a very strong bias when you adopt a gender perspective, an equity perspective, a rights perspective. You need to understand different cultures and contexts. And so biases of rights, equity, gender must come into your evaluation. So you can't be such a clinical evaluator that you say, I'll just report what I'm observing. I'm just checking on my time. So unless Anirudh is going to remind me.
No, sir, please continue, sir.
Yeah. So I also want to take a minute to talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence, because I think that is now emerging as a major area of data collection and evidence. So machine learning is actually only a ramped up version of correlation. And we know that correlation is in causation. In fact, in public policy, social sciences, and in the field of evaluation, we worry about causality, not about correlation. Machine learning can be used to make predictions, but predictions do not offer you solutions. So for example, I can predict that there is going to be rain tomorrow, and I might carry an umbrella with me. But carrying the umbrella does not stop rain from, or does not predict if there's going to be rain or not. So we have to be really careful about, that machine learning, artificial intelligence are not a substitute for causal reflection and therefore finding solutions. So we have to use evaluation to find causation, and then we should be able to talk about how it's going to affect different kinds of people, and therefore what is the nature of intervention we need. But all this is not to say that we should not undermine the usefulness of prediction. There is lots of prediction problems that are needed. For example, even if you look at the profile of under trials, if you just look at the data on who's getting jailed and who's getting arrested, it is very easy to figure out what is the profile of under trials. Or if you're trying to figure out what kinds of teachers to hire, and you'll get a nice profile that big data can throw up, and saying that, these are the profiles of teachers who are getting hired and who's being left out, and so on and so forth. So I'm not undermining the use of machine learning, but just to say that we have to be focusing as evaluators on causation. The last point I want to make is, the last question is, how do we keep a focus on the end purpose of evaluation, and of both monitoring and evaluation? So we often say that evaluation should contribute to the positive transformation of societies. And I think that's what is most critical. And for achieving this, evaluation should go beyond finding out if a particular intervention or a scheme of the government delivered promised results or not. People want to know whether or not government policies and programs have contributed to widening choices, guaranteeing better human rights, or enlarging freedoms for women and girls. People want to judge performance of governments by assessing the extent to which policies and programs have contributed to ending deprivations, reducing inequalities, eliminating injustice, ending powerlessness, and reducing vulnerabilities. So evaluation has to be responsive to what people want to know, and not what the funders are asking. And sometimes the two questions may not be identical. Therefore, the evaluation questions we formulate or frame have to be well defined. To what extent have interventions contributed to improving the quality of people's lives, or for greater empowerment of the poor, and ultimately have processes and policies led to sustainable and transformational changes in society. Let me come to the third part of my presentation. And here again, I want to list 3 critical features of evaluation that young and emerging evaluators like you might find helpful if you keep it in mind. One is that looking ahead, all of us, and particularly you young people, need to be creative and innovative for the field of evaluation to make a significant contribution. And there is a strong feeling, especially if you speak to senior officials in government, that evaluation is really not helpful. It is backward looking, and you're evaluating a project or an intervention that was started 5 years ago with the theory of change that you helped craft 5 years ago, but the world has changed. All those assumptions and risks have changed. So what is the point of asking me whether that theory of change, I'm using it as the framework to evaluate an intervention, when we have made so many changes in the last 5 years and we have adapted to the new threats and new risks that have come up and moved along. So how do we factor in this? Because transformative change is complicated. With the best of intentions, getting sustained results is unpredictable, and understanding change itself is complex. And when you're talking about so-called evaluating and talking about success and lessons learned, we have to factor in that one region within a country is very different from another region in the same country. So when in India, for example, if you say there's so many good things happening in Kerala, why don't you take the lessons from Kerala and apply it to, let's say, Assam? They will say, my God, the context is so different. So why are you even talking about Kerala or North India or East India in that sense? The practice of democracy differs from one region to another, and as does the presence of civil society organizations. And in all this, when you actually go to do evaluation, the function is severely constrained by limited information. I talked about it, very limited financial resources, limited capacities, and so on. Limited time, there's always a hurry, and so on and so forth. So as you're looking forward, when you have to be critical, when you have to be innovative, I'm saying we still have to define outcomes, what is meant by empowerment, how do you define sustainability, what is meant by resilience. These are all unanswered questions that are still left. What are the appropriate indicators that will capture many of these very important ideas that talk about transformation in the world? Second, I would say evaluation needs to be embedded in the practice of democracy. And evaluation has at its core functions of accountability and learning, as we know, and both are fundamental to making the practice of democracy, practice of evaluation effective, equitable, and efficient. In democracies, of course, accountability should not be limited only to and between political parties. It is common for the opposition to demand accountability from the political party in power, but evaluators need to move beyond this. Evaluation should ensure accountability to people at all levels, starting with local communities to the highest levels of governance. This will call for more disaggregated evaluations so that we know how interventions impact different communities and groups of people, and we really owe it as evaluators to take the findings of the evaluation and share it with local communities whose lives are affected by the intervention, and not necessarily report only to the central government or those who have commissioned the evaluation. And I think that means that in the future, I see the role of the evaluator as not just to undertake evaluation, but also to become a strong champion and an advocate, and take the responsibility of a moral obligation, or fulfill a moral obligation of taking the findings and going back to the communities and the people whom you interviewed and sharing the findings with them. The last point is, just like I said, evaluation needs to be embedded in the practice of democracy. I will end by saying democracy needs to be embedded in the practice of evaluation. And I say this because it's important to remind ourselves that as evaluators, that in the ultimate analysis, evaluations should be for the benefit of people. Processes and methods should be by the people, made as participatory and inclusive as possible. Professor Robert Chambers has spent his whole life ensuring this. Mallika ji and others have also been championing this, but it's not so easy, we find, after so many years in the field of evaluation. And so I really urge you young evaluators to find creative ways of making this really happen. It is our responsibility to involve communities and people, to communicate with them, and like I said, share the findings with people. And we have to trigger off public debates and discussions. So, and only if we trigger public debates and discussions will we be able to empower people, give voice to people, and use also the media to help us in this exercise. So finally, let me end by saying that I'm delighted to find so many of you taking on this challenge as young and emerging evaluators and making a commitment to taking up evaluation. I want to end by saying that an equally important aspect of evaluation that needs to be emphasized is ethics. Evaluators need to display honesty and not merely statistical acumen. I want to recall what the late economist Mehboob Haq, some of you might recall, he was a Pakistani economist, one of the architects of the Human Development Reports. He would often tell us that in the world of development, it is not wisdom, but courage that is required. And I think this statement that is even more applicable in the world of evaluation. As a young evaluator, you need wisdom, but you also need more courage to tell the truth. As they say, it is courage to speak truth to power, and evaluation requires guts, and the field of evaluation is only for the brave. So I'm sure as young evaluators, you will display extraordinary courage, unique professionalism, and make splendid contributions to public debates and public discussions. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my views with you. All the very best, and look forward to staying in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. And I think that really sets us the tone for this, the next, I think, 4 sessions of training sessions which we are going to have for the young evaluators, starting with today, which is the first one. But one thing important, I think the first takeaway which sir was speaking about, it is about this voice of the people and the courage to speak the truth. And as evaluators, we are always caught up between. And an evaluation is so much more than just a baseline and a midline and an end line, which we do. And some sample, 1,000 sample there and 2,000 sample there. It's much more to capture the voices of the people and the marginalized people and talk about those voices and articulate their voices in such a manner that changes can happen. And we have a significant role to play over there as evaluators. My next speaker, and as I welcome her, I do not know how do I present to you, is Malika ji. More than 40 years in doing this evaluation work, and not only in Sri Lanka, but all across South Asia. She was the founder member of the SLEVA, and also the founder member and first president of Community of Evaluators in South Asia. She inspired a lot of us to actually get into the movement of having better evaluations and building these communities of evaluators and bringing these kindred souls who talk about evaluations and who love this field of evaluation passionately across the South Asia. Malika ji has worked across the world so closely with Robert Chambers, understanding these issues of voices of people, doing evaluations across the world, and tons of experience which she can share on the issues of gender, how to actually doing beautiful qualitative studies. Malika, I will stop here and I will hand over it to you to sort of give us the conceptual background and the objectives of the training program which you have sort of launched. We are launching into LCOE South Asia.
I lost my connection. One moment.
We can hear you, Malika ji.
Okay, fine. So
go ahead, Malika.
Thank you very much, Aniruddha, for that introduction. And more than anything else, let me appreciate even at this early point what Dr. Shivakumar has been trying to convey to us with regard to evaluation. It's not an end in itself. It's only a means to enrich community and people's lives. With that background, I would like to spell out the objectives of the YE training program. Why did we think of having a training program for the YEEs? Of course, I must re-emphasize saying YEE means young and emerging evaluators. So most of these people who have joined today may not be inexperienced. They may be experienced to some extent. some may be beginners. So at various levels of understanding, we are participating today. But everybody, I'm quite confident, will carry home something that they had not been convinced before. Because the eminent speakers who are addressing today, including Dr. Shiv Kumar, who made repeated references to Dr. Robert Chambers, my guru as well, who was joining us with the opening remarks on the first day. So having said that, for YEEs to be technically sound by understanding the conceptual background evaluation, I would consider as the major objective of this whole program. Then it is also to improve the basic understanding of methods and tools of evaluation. We will, during the course of these presentations, have an analysis of the different types of tools that we use in evaluation and also the advantages of using them. Then another key area during this course of the training program is understanding the fundamental criteria of evaluation. Basically, Development Assistance Committee, which is called DAC criteria, very well known and very much used today in the evaluation field. Then also the concept of impact evaluation. Some people say that evaluation, of course, people understand that monitoring is an ongoing process and evaluation is a midterm or end of term process. Well, given that, that also means to come to the end, we need to go through the whole process. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. So I hope this training program will allow us to understand this particular aspect and then progressively lead to understanding impact evaluation. Yeah. The role of monitoring and evaluation in the development process, we are touching in this program with reference to sustainable development goals. We often talk about sustainable development goals, and it is towards that the entire effort in evaluation contributes to. How can we improve ourselves? Have we realized the objectives that we had in mind before we started on this particular project? So monitoring keeps you tracking the process, but at the end of it, at the end of a period, say midterm or end of term, we are evaluating whether we have achieved what we have aspired to achieve. So in order to understand the impact, we do have to understand the role of monitoring and evaluation. And with reference to particularly the Sustainable Development Goals. You'll hear more during the process of this training, so I don't want to touch all that at this initial point of time. To understand guiding principles and ethics is also included in the training programs. So what are the guiding principles? What are the ethics that we need to follow? There's quite a lot to learn. So we will look forward to understanding that as well. To promote YEEs to become competent, experienced, and well-networked professionals. That is also the thinking behind in the training that we try to organize for the YEEs. YEEs, I'm sure, will eventually contribute to the national, regional, and international levels. Then increase the availability of skilled evaluators to meet the growing demand. Today, we have to admit the fact that there is a short in supply. There is such a demand to have valuable, productive, constructive evaluations. But whether we can deliver that is still a gap to be met. To promote the inclusion of youth and young people in the evaluation process is therefore one of my main objectives in designing this program. You will become competent at the end of it and also try to apply in your own way to assess what you are doing is right or wrong, or whether it is getting directed towards the end objective that you aspire to achieve. To encourage the inclusion of young evaluators in voluntary organizations for professional evaluators, commonly known as the WOPAs. Now, in the WOPAs, we find that the people who are very much active is still the older generation of evaluators. So we want to encourage the young evaluators to more and more to join the WOPAs or the voluntary organizations of professional evaluators. For that, you must have the knowledge, you must have the practice, you must have the experience. So here we are trying to build on those lines. To initiate getting together a group of young and emerging evaluators in South Asia, and I mean Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Maldives, Nepal, India, and Sri Lanka, to register as members of a South Asian group who will link with the global Evaluate group. Not that the process of evaluation will be very different in the rest of the world, but it becomes very specifically applied to in the particular geographical area that we address. And in this particular place, in this particular instance, we are trying to focus on the South Asian group. Given these objectives, it is considered necessary to organize an orientation or a training program for the group of YEEs. The people who are very fresh to evaluation, who are very fresh to monitoring and evaluation, and who are eagerly waiting to learn, this is your opportunity. Please make use of it. To help coordinate and maximize evaluation effort through mobilization of professionals, young and emerging evaluators, as well as mentors and supporters of Evaluate activities. That is the underlying purpose of this whole process in trying to organize these training programs for the YEEs, with that end objective that you become part and parcel of the development process in any country. Dr. Shivakumar very well said that this is not an easy task. It is learning all the time, learning throughout your process, and then trying to look back and see whether we have achieved what we wanted to achieve. And that is also irrespective of gender or age, or whether you're young or old. Learning is common to all of us. We are all in a learning situation. And that is why it is called learning is lifelong. It is lifelong. We are every day learning something new. We are every day listening to some people, and they come up with an aspect that we never thought before. And I think Dr. Shivakumar in his presentation particularly stressed the fact that we need to share the findings in the community. Sometimes we make the sad mistake of gathering whatever information we need to gather and we go away with it. We never share it with the community. The only way to become a learning process, it has to be shared with the community. Sometimes what we got by asking questions may not be the answers that people wanted to give. So the only way to have a clear understanding of the situation on ground is by sharing that information with the community itself. So they become not only partners in giving information, but also in understanding the learning from others' points of view as well. With that ended view, we have designed this training program for the YIEs. So it has 4 technical sessions. We are beginning with this first technical session today. And with that very fine introduction by Dr. Shivakumar, I think we are ready to go ahead with the rest of the program. So thank you all, and thank you, Aniruddha. I know your job is not an easy task. Moderation is the toughest task that I have ever encountered, to make the balance between what you hear and what you want to understand. I know we have picked on the right person to do that. Thank you so much, Aniruddha. And I will not thank the speakers right now, but at least I appreciated, let me appreciate the time and energy they are putting in to make this effort a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Mallika. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Right. Without, let's get on sort of getting to the more meatier part of the program, where we talk and understanding the very basic concepts of evaluation. And for that, we have Chela. Chiradurai is like, again, a very old hand in the field of evaluations, and he has been working in the area of rural policy, planning, child rights and development, livelihoods, social enterprises for long years, focused on how to get evaluations right and getting newer methodologies into evaluation. And he has also been I think, the founder and now currently the chairperson of the Community of Evaluators South Asia. And Chila, I leave it to you to take forward the discussion on the basic points of evaluation. It will be a 20-minute of sharing of the basic concepts, and thereafter we will have a 10 minutes of quick, open session where we can ask a couple of questions from the audience, from the participants, and then we will sort of try, and Chila will try to answer those questions. So 20 minutes and then 10 minutes for asking questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Anirudh. Okay. Yes. Okay, thank you. Good evening to all, and good evening especially to the youth who have come here to participate in the training session. After hearing Dr. Shivakumar, one side I feel, okay, that's exactly we should hear before we start the basics. And it also makes me feel very, very small, because what I'm going to present is the very basic in front of what Dr. Shivakumar suggested or critiqued or he put forward. This is only a kind of basics, and it has to be really kind of looked at in that context. That's very crucial. In fact, I wanted to start by sharing some of these. I think Shivakumar has said it, because we have to look at monitoring and evaluation holistically. Holistically would mean that the whole context, what Shivakumar was talking about, that's very, very crucial. We have to talk in terms of what's the kind of context we have, what are the issues we have, how are we really kind of placing these interventions or the projects or the programs. Then only we can really kind of look at this. You know, after hearing Dr. Shivakumar, this looking at this basic, which I feel is very important. Some of you might have already gone through it. Maybe it's a little preliminary, but still I would feel it is good to refresh our minds and thinking. But it also talks about the basics and the fundamentals. But then, you know, if you really go deeper into what Shivakumar has said, and it's really shaken up these basics and fundamentals. And I feel that the whole basics, what we are talking about, have to be really kind of rewritten, remoduled, and it's happening. It's happening. However, that is one side, but we need to really kind of good to have a good look at what we have as youth, what we have gone through it, and how we have come through it. But in a way, I feel, okay, at that time of youth, it is different from now. If you have to really go by what we were talking about those days, how you learn. Now you all jump leaps and bounds. We are just walking and you're jumping. So we have to really kind of cope up with that. With all the kind of things in mind, I'm just presenting the very basics and hope it will help you to refresh your mind. And then we will come back to some of the questions what Shivakumar has raised, and that will be kind of weighed against what is presented as the basics. Okay. Now what I'm going to present is 6 kind of areas. One is I'm going to present a kind of same sample case of a project in a context. Then I'm talking about the kind of whole project cycle, how it is really formulated, how it looks like. Then we talk about what is monitoring and what is evaluation, then the monitoring and evaluation design and features, and the conceptual frameworks. Then we will open for questions and interactions. Okay, so let me come to the questions. The case project. This is a live project where I am closely involved with. It's a project here in Karnataka. People who are in India will know Karnataka, close to Bangalore, Chikkalapur district. There is a district, whole district called Silk Production Unit or Silk Production District, where the collaboration between Japanese and Indian government came in a big way. They wanted to promote, and then it also created a lot of employment for adults and economic activities in the district. But at the same time, it also created a lot of child labor, child abuse, child marriage, this illiteracy, all that. So that is the kind of challenging in the sense, context we have to look at it. I'm just saying it in brief. If you really go deeper into some of the challenges, I will really touch upon what Sheikh Mal was saying. So with this kind of context, the issues, based on a kind of research into see the rampant prevalence of school dropouts and child labor, after seeing that, the whole objective of the project was formed to mainstream children into formal education and to eradicate child labor and child marriage. That was the kind of objective of the project. And then the activities, again, is a very brief activities what I have mentioned, because I am just mentioning this case because I will keep referring this case as I go on. It is good for you to kind of reflect this case or sing it against the basic, which I am going to talk about it later. That's why I'm just spending a little more time on that. So activities in terms of project activities, first we start with organizing the parents, convincing the parents, making them aware of the child rights and importance of education, and then also give the preschools before the children enter into first standard. You have to really encourage and motivate, give them some kind of education. Then mainstream the dropout children into school and provide them supplementary education. Then ongoing, this goes on. There are many other activities. In terms of the outputs and outcome and impact, the project derived that we need to really identify and enroll school dropouts into schools. And then outcome is keep children in school till 14 years. As impact, they wanted to eradicate child labor and child marriage. There is a kind of outcome, outputs, outcome and impact they kind of derive. So let me go to the next slide of the project cycle, and then I will be able to explain a little more. So the initiation of the project, actually, when we talked about the context, that is exactly the kind of context what Sheikh was talking about. There were so many issues of inequality. So there's so many issues of low wage, then children going with parents to the small industries, silk weaving industry, and then the issues of health issues of bronchitis. There are so many other skin diseases. So I can keep on saying the kind of different inequalities and social injustice was happening because of the context there. So with that, the project derived that objectives of, to mainstream the school children, to start with the children and to eradicate child labor and child marriage. Then in terms when it comes to the kind of planning, depending on the extent of the strength of the organization as an NGO, what kind of project they could cover, how many children they can take it, like 2,000 children to be mainstreamed. Then if it is 2,000 children, how do you really kind of conceptually frame what would be the kind of outcome? This outcome, like, we want to really enroll them into school. Then first of all, identify, then enroll school dropouts into schools. Then, as an outcome, you need to really kind of keep the children in school. So it's not just keeping the children in school. You need to also keep them the interest going, otherwise they will drop out the next time. So we have to really kind of formulate that conceptual framework, then evolve the budget, and then roles of different stakeholders and the project. That's the kind of planning stage of the project. Then comes to the kind of execution. Once it is planned, then comes to the kind of execution where you also get in touch with donors and see how much they can kind of allocate, accordingly kind of get the resource and then allocate for different activities. And then they initiate the process and the activities, as I mentioned, the different activities which the project has put forward as a framework. Then comes the kind of monitoring and control. Here is the monitoring and control means that monitoring, you'll see later, monitoring is a kind of continuous and ongoing process, and it helps you to really kind of collect the data as you execute the project. Like if you have kind of motivated, say 1,000 families, and you have been able to enroll 1,000 children over a period of say 2 years, and then you will be able to produce certain kind of results saying, okay, you are able to produce so much of results. So it also gives you certain kind of control, how much keeping a track of the kind of activities according to what you have planned. And do you want to really kind of adjust the kind of the target, or you want to really include more activities? So the monitoring provides that kind of support to take the control of the project, to manage it in a better way. So the whole monitoring takes place from execution. I mean, it's not a kind of execution monitoring, it's a linear way, but it happens simultaneously in an ongoing way. So that's what I put that kind of arrow there. Then comes the evaluation, learning, and closure. So evaluation, as it is known, that is, it can be a kind of midterm evaluation depending on the whether it is a 5-year project or 7-year project. So it depends on that. But normally it takes place at the end of the project to find out whether the whole project has met the desired objectives. So then you learn from that the exercise of evaluations with clear evidence. You really try to find out how much you have been able to quantitatively figure out what you have achieved, and also that the qualitative aspect also, which is very important, where Shivakumar was talking about. So quantitative can be one thing, and when it comes to a kind of qualitative is another thing. So it is very, very important. And then, when it comes to evaluation and learning and monitoring, you also see the difference. The monitoring is more of a kind of the internal kind of process, and it's monitored with the internal people, so the internal team. But when it comes to the evaluation, it is basically an external person. External person, it is basically to give a kind of objectivity, but then, one can also challenge how objective the external evaluator is. So whether the external evaluator goes by what is written in words, or whether he will also have a kind of positive bias towards the betterment of the people. So that also kind of plays a role. But basically, monitoring would mean is the internal person doing it. Evaluation would mean that the external person kind of taking care of it or facilitating the whole process. So I have stayed a little more on that. Let me run through the whole aspect of the different aspects of monitoring and evaluations. What is monitoring actually? So as it is projected here, as I also indicated earlier, it's as a basic thing is monitoring is a collection of routine data that measures the progress of the project implementation. Yeah. So as I said, the activities are drawn out, and the children have to be enrolled. Children have to be in the school. They have to continue in the schooling. They have to complete the school. The project monitors all that and also produces that results and gives that kind of track of the activities. And of course, it is a kind of systematic process. You have always a monitoring system in place. Every project or organization should have a system in place, keeping in mind so indicators, the quantitative and qualitative indicators for each level. and then it has to be kind of measured accordingly. So that's what I said, continuous and systematic process of collecting and analyzing information to determine if a project program is being implemented according to plan. And of course, monitoring helps to assess how well the project is being delivered, as I said already. Okay. So what does monitoring measure? What does monitoring measure is a key question actually. It measures, as it is said, as it is obviously kind of put here. It is the implementation it measures, how far it is kind of progressed, and also the projects are placed in different sites. Also, it helps to compare the progress in different areas, so that you can make that kind of rectifications or course corrections. And another important aspect is the whole cost aspect, because this activity involves direct input of resources, and whether the resource really produces the desired result, whether it is really kind of overshooting or it is underspending. So that also gives that kind of estimate how efficient it is. Then of course that it is that measures efforts and direct outputs of the intervention. So in other words, as I said, the output is identify and enroll school dropouts into school, and the monitoring ultimately really kind of measures. So how many children were identified, how many children were enrolled into schools, and how many children are really kind of staying in the school and continuing. So that is basically kind of, that's what it says, the monitoring. But of course, it's just one or two things for you to know, that monitoring does not measure the impact or outcome or impact. So in other words, that it measures only the result. It does not capture the effects or outcome or impact of the project. So it's the use of the monitoring, as I already kind of said it, that it helps you to better understand the results. Because in a large project, it's happening in the activities are happening in different places. Management is sitting in one place who like to know what is the kind of progress of this whole activities, what it has created. So it helps to understand the management. It helps the management to really kind of understand the whole progress. And then it helps the management to also refine if there is the progress is not happening well, or it is creating some kind of a negative result, and it helps the management to rectify. So in other words, that though there is a design, there is a kind of frame concept, the framework how it should be progressing, when it really sees that it's not really coming to that level, the monitoring data provides that. It helps the management to intervene and rectify, to refine the efforts, refine the activities or modify the activities. So in a way that, it doesn't wait for the management or the project to end till the end of 3 years or 5 years, then to say, oh, something has gone wrong. But just before it comes to that level itself is to help to rectify, so that, puts on the right track towards the goal, towards the objective. Now, when it comes to the evaluation, as I said, that monitoring is an ongoing or continuous process of data collection in a systematic way. Evaluation is the project end. At the end of it, we want to kind of look back and see what the project has really achieved, whether it has really achieved the expected objectives. So the evaluation again looks at really kind of the outcome of this project, like project outcome, as I indicated earlier in the case, that you have to keep the children from that particular town till 14 years. In other words, till 10th form or 10th standard, they have to be in schools. So the whole evaluation will see that what is the kind of outcome from that project. And of course, that is the evaluation. We will also look at it later as different types of evaluation. You also have outcome evaluation, also the impact evaluation, but evaluation looks at both outcome and impact. So the evaluation also, you must see, evaluation also, like in a project in a town, as I said, in any kind of context, in any kind of situation. So not only that particular project is operating, but there are also so many other actors. There are also government is coming out, so many education program, initiatives and subsidies, and there can be also many other external influence. So within all that, we need to also kind of find out how much this particular project is contributed to the change, what has happened in that particular area. In other words, in this particular kind of situation where this project is operating, where you claim that 2,000 children are put in the school and they are studying till the 10th standard, but whether it is only because of your project or it is also because of the other influences. So how much your project has contributed to keep the children in the school till 14 years?
1 minute more.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So then, so what can evaluation do? So help to objectively assess the extent to which the intervention is having had the direct outcomes. Then, of course, it helps to reporting and learning. Then happen at the end of the intervention or project. Then it also can be mid-level. So the evaluation, the type of evaluations, okay, so as I said, this outcome evaluation is one thing which measures the intended effect or intermittent changes. The impact evaluation is something that it measures the sustainable changes or the long-term effect that have been brought. And there is also a kind of process evaluation, which is also important. That focuses on the services delivered, the resources used to deliver the services, and how it is managed, and what works, what doesn't work. So it focuses on that. And besides, we also have the formative and summative validation. But in short, the formative is more of a process. Of course, sometimes the formative also covers the design of the project or the program. So summative evaluation is the kind of project and evaluation. Then just this is the kind of design when you do this M&E, both you have to have the terms of reference and the project plan, and then the data quantity and qualitative. Of course, this qualitative assessment plan. Then, of course, the deliverables and the dissemination user findings. This is a kind of design you have to have when you plan this monitoring or evaluation. But one important thing which I like to just say and then conclude with that is that the whole framework, or the conceptual framework or the theory of change, which you plan at the beginning of the project, which captures the activities, the outputs, outcome, impact assumptions, all with some indicator, clear indicator just captures that. It's all put in place, because when you do the monitoring or evaluation, it's always kind of measured against that. And then also we have the kind of contextual external influencing factor that is also captured. In other words, that how much the external forces or external factors are contributing to that, external forces are challenging to that. These are the kind of things we have to really kind of see at the beginning itself. And then you see whether it will be a kind of favorable, or if it is not favorable, how we are going to kind of counter effect that. So this is the framework, which is also very crucial before we really talk about this monitoring and evaluations. So let me conclude with that, and then we will interact when we have questions. Thank you, Anirudh.
Okay, thank you, Chela. I'm just opening up the floor for a couple of 2 or 3 quick questions on the points covered by Chela till now. So the framework and basic difference between MA monitoring and evaluation. All right, I have one question which is there, Chela, the first question in the chat box, which says that can we have combination of type of evaluation when conducting project evaluation, or it should always be independent to each other?
Say it again.
Can we have a
Yeah.
combination of type of evaluation when conducting project evaluation, or it should be independent to each other?
Actually, that's really a kind of good questions actually. So if you really look at very conventionally, but it is always, as I said, it is the measuring the outcome or impact or the process. But there is also a combination of certain aspects. Like when you measure the outcome, you may also include this whole process evaluation, because which we feel that is very, very crucial. Actually, when you look at in the next session this whole DART criteria, so that will say more about that. But there is always a kind of combination, depends on the needs of the stakeholders. For example, if the donor feels, okay, these are the kind of areas I would like to look at, not only the kind of outcome, I would like to also look at the process and also certain aspects of the impact. So it's a combination. So I will not say it is only strict one and the other. Thank you.
Okay. The another question we've got from Uma, which talks about the next question, Chela, maybe a long-term question. Okay. Programs and projects also vary in terms of design and approach. Some are dynamic, that is high frequency and needs and need-based inputs and activities. How do you modify the theory of change and the results framework? All right, it all boils down to how do you modify, with the dynamic situation, how do you modify the theory of change and results framework? Can you have quick thoughts on that?
Yeah. Okay. So there are also other resource people here. They can also contribute. But let me start with that. Actually, as I understand this, the whole conceptual framework. Again, I would say, as I think when Shivkumar was saying, when you do the framework, that is before the project, that is 5 years before. So when you do the evaluation, it is after 3 years or 5 years. Okay. So in between, a lot of changes are taking place. So you cannot really kind of make that as a very rigid framework. And this whole theory of change, overall, it might remain the same, but a lot of it should be really a kind of review. If to my understanding, to my kind of experience, which I have been also kind of critically telling the projects, that is, it's very important to have a kind of midterm review of the whole conceptual framework, so that you will be able to really kind of keep the relevance till the end of the project. So I will stop here. Maybe the other Shiv and Rashmi or Malika can also just join.
Just I will just remove my moderator's hat and just pitch in just a couple of lines on the TOC. Yes, TOC is a dynamic, dynamic. It cannot be static. So you got to revisit, revise it as at appropriate points of time and review it, because at times, various new stakeholders appear, or various actors appear, or various factors also get into the whole process. It's a dynamic thing. We never can think about a theory of change being, static. And so that's, I think it's critical to review it, and more so because if you are in this situation where there's COVID and all those things are affecting implementation across, we need to revisit the theory of change and make it more aligned to the current situations and norms. Or at times we scale down our, ambition in the project. So all these things can be achieved. Definitely, it definitely remains a dynamic document. I will just on the part of the time being, I will stop here. And at this point, I will request, I will ask Rashmi ji to sort of come in and share about the role of young and emerging evaluators in the process of evaluation. But before that, let me also tell Rashmi ji introduce Dr. Rashmi Agarwal a bit. She has been one of the most dynamic and positive persons I have been meeting across in this whole circuit of the whole evaluation circuit for the last couple of years, plenty number of years. And she has been a partner in crime in number of things with me also, in different forums, ECOI, COE, and different places. And she has been in government for a long period of time, Niti Aayog and different other places, teaching young evaluators across. She used to run a global course on evaluation where a lot of country people used to come. She used to manage and run that course. And despite that, she has also been so active in the non-governmental sector also, where she has done so many evaluations and, evaluation of government programs. You can ask Rashmiji. If you talk of non-government programs, ask Rashmiji. So there she has got a lot of hats she has worn across these years. And recently, the effort she has put into getting this whole issue of around the professionalization of evaluation as a co-chair, and a fantastic effort. Rashmiji, I'll stop here and request you now to share your views on the role of young evaluators in emerging evaluators.
Thank you very much, Aniruddha. For such an introduction, I don't think I deserve that. And thank you, Mallika ji, and the team members for giving me this opportunity to interact with you all. I request Rajasri to please run my slides. So as you can see that the topic is extremely relevant because I see a lot of young evaluators here. Just give me a minute. And you can see the photo on the screen. Actually, this will be the crux of my presentation, which indicates the starting of the movement, networking, mentorship, all these things I am going to speak about the role of evaluators. Next slide, please. You can see this picture, and in my deliberations, I am sure I will not be troubling you with the nitty-gritties of evaluation. The earlier speaker has very excellently given a total framework of monitoring and evaluation, and I will focus my presentation on what, why, and how to involve our evaluation thoughts bearers, that is the young and emerging evaluators, whom I will now call as WISE. Next slide, please. So what actually we mean by WISE? Youth as such is a fluid category and is associated with various age groups by different agencies in varying circumstances. The United Nations takes to actually 15 to 24 age group as the youth. Different countries had different norms and cutoff point. India, for example, adopts the age group of 15 to 29 as the youth. But when we talk about the context of evaluation, it simply leaves out the lower limit and raises the upper limit to 35. So to take care of emerging evaluators, our definition also includes evaluators with less than 5 years of experience, recently passed out graduates willing to take up evaluation as a profession or as a career, or development professionals with knowledge of evaluation. The definition you can see is thus quite flexible and in reality covers all those relatively young and or have a few years of experience or interest and knowledge in evaluation. Next slide, please. So whatever may be the definition, young evaluators have a very significant role to play in the development arena. Youth constitute an important segment of nation's population and is the target of major development activity, such as you can see them in the field of education, science and technology, health and employment and training, whatever field could be there, youth is always involved and they are the target of all development. So they are not only the target of development, but are also vitally interested in and affected by the performance and achievements in the development programs. Youth are therefore the major stakeholders in most development interventions and are keen to see that they succeed and to know how they are impacting their lives. They must have a say in their planning, implementation, and evaluation as such. Not only that, youth and young evaluators can also contribute immensely to the evaluation process and raise the quality of evidence generated. They bring, as we all know, that they bring new ideas, they bring new energy, they contribute refreshingly off the beaten track approaches. They are conversant with modern technology, they can adopt and adapt technological innovations more easily than some of us. So, full of enthusiasm, they are keen to learn and experiment. It is important that they are involved in the development and evaluation process wholeheartedly and should not be treated merely as beneficiaries or sample of information providers. Next slide, please. So broadly keeping this perspective in focus, the global movement of Evaluate was formally launched at Kathmandu Global Evaluation Forum held in the International Year of Evaluation in November 2015. Now you can relate the photo in my first slide with this, whatever now I am telling and whatever you can see on this slide. So the basic objectives of the movement are to enhance the involvement of young and emerging evaluators in evaluation activities, expand opportunities for their capacity development and engagement as evaluators in their participation in various evaluation events. In the short time since then, movement has grown rapidly into a worldwide organization of partnerships with its regional and national entities and branches. For instance, in Asia, there is a regional entity, as you already know, you are seeing Evaluate Asia. There are three national entities. They are in Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and India. And Evaluate India is perhaps the youngest of these, having come into existence in 2020. The National Youth Chapter function as parts of the respective national groupings in collaborative and mutually beneficial manner. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little history about how and why it has been formed, there had been 4 task forces constituted by Evaluate Global to promote activities emphasized for Evaluate. 3 were thought of initially in 2015, while 4th was added in 2019. I will give you a little objectives of these task forces. So first task force had been WISE in WOPES. So its objectives were to increase the involvement of young and emerging evaluators in WOPE activities, governance, and also participate in the leadership. The second task force had been mentoring, that focused on implementing the Evaluate Global Mentoring Program, an initiative to support young professionals to become skilled and dependable professionals that can confidently take up evaluation roles and responsibilities in their communities and countries. The third task force was e-learning, that was to build the capacities of WISE through free and highly accessible networking, capacity building activities and other opportunities. It aimed at achieving this by hosting e-learning webinars and virtual conferences. The fourth that was added in 2019, as I said, it was relating to the youth participatory evaluation. It was to show that children and teenagers can play a role in evaluation processes. The act of engaging young people in M&D processes is considered an evaluation approach, a method, and even has a name, that is already said, youth participatory evaluation. Next slide, please. So you can see here the important slide I wanted to share, because the role of evaluators is linked to the total evaluation ecosystem. So we have to understand what is the evaluation ecosystem first. How WISE can blend into a holistic evaluation ecosystem and to what extent. What do we understand by evaluation ecosystem? This involves collaboration with stakeholders, advocacy, getting quality evidence, and ensure that recommendations of evaluations are implemented. There is quality evidence. There is need to have professional evaluators. So both demand and supply should have a mix, and we can see that there should be a well-established evaluation system at various levels. So if we consider these 6 pillars of evaluation ecosystem and analyze one by one, it may be possible to ascertain the extent to which YEs could be engaged. I will explain it with some examples. For example, in the first pillar, where we talk about the engaging stakeholders, like academic institutions, recent graduates can play a very vital role as they are connected with these institutions. They can influence their peers and more recent students to get to know more about the importance of evaluation and possibly opt for careers in that field. They can equally exert some influence on the administrations of their academic institutions through their earlier deans and professors to think in terms of starting professional courses in monitoring and evaluations, which is the real need of the time. Similarly, some YEs are associated with NGOs or civil society organizations, and therefore they can dovetail their activities with monitoring and evaluation field as well. Using M&D methods would definitely help in achieving and improve the performance of the NGOs, whatever its field of activity may be. That is why I rated YE's role in engaging stakeholders as great extent. Now, the next pillar, we can see that YEs can use their skills in developing various audiovisual material for advocacy of evaluation. They have good social networking and can use social platforms to a great extent and very effectively, through which they can promote and enhance evaluation visibility. My rating to this role is again to a very high extent. YEs can also have easy access to media and maybe to some other organizations or maybe to some political parties to urge for evaluations and evidence on performance and its use in judging the utility of development program. They are therefore demand boosters for evaluations on one hand, while on the other hand, by pursuing evaluation as a career, they augment the supply of quality evaluators in due course can assist in developing M&D modules and resource products. I see in this pillar of ecosystem relating to evidence with quality their involvement as medium extent. The fourth pillar is enhancing use of evaluation, which requires a continuous discussion and dialogue with policymakers. To my thinking, YEs have a limited role depending upon their association with policymakers. Similarly, in capacity development, where M&D courses are to be designed and delivered, trainings for professional evaluators are to be organized for enhancing their skills. The role of YEs is again limited as they themselves need mentorship and capacity building initiatives. The last pillar in this slide, you can see is establishing an M&D system. This system can be established at organizational level or local level or regional level as well national level. Establishing M&D system comes up to a participatory approach where YEs can be partners as it will be mutual learning. So this slide reflects only my tentative and indicative thoughts and does not show any hard and fast rule in this. Next slide, please. To summarize the previous slide, it can be said that YEs can work as evidence gatherer. Youth are good communicators and can easily build rapport with the respondents and others. They can find it easy to conduct interviews and collect data. They would also be comfortable in participatory methods and help in using these techniques. They can function as moderators and note takers in various techniques like FGDs, or on the observation techniques, they can give their observation on any intervention, etc. Young evaluators can work as information providers using their perspective of a situation or a program or any intervention. They can also help in interpreting information gathered and throw deeper insights into it. For instance, they can easily establish contact with younger respondents and enlarge their perspectives on the evidence. With their creative approach, new and fresh ideas, energy, and enthusiasm, young evaluators can contribute immensely to the design of evaluation, to data collection methods by using technology, big data, etc., to data analysis and interpretation. They can act as good advocates in promoting evaluative thinking, generating demand for evaluations, and transferring evaluation skills. Gradually, they can develop into excellent evaluators and leaders, and also the champions of evaluation. So this arrow you can see in this slide actually indicates the continuum, which implies that this is a journey towards attaining expertise in evaluation and co-create. Next slide, please. So do we have any responsibility towards them? If we want to engage young and emerging evaluators, how they can undertake this journey successfully? They need a commitment from us that policymakers, program planners, and project management and evaluation experts will accept them, provide freedom, and create an environment where they could feel wanted. Their skills could be upgraded as per demand of the ever-evolving evaluation field. We need to provide them their space to think and act freely and help wherever they need. YEs generally ask what the future holds for them. What are the career opportunities for them if they want to join this field? These questions are, in a sense, real challenge and to be answered. On one hand, hand-holding will be extremely necessary, and opportunities are to be created for a career development on the other hand. Next slide, please. So there you can see there are some positive vibes in the sense that in the short journey of just a couple of years, some of the national evaluate chapters have established that a lot can be done by them through collaboration with national OPs, government, and academic institutions. YEs have shown tremendous potential in carrying out evaluation activities. Here is some evidence. I would like to tell what they have done so far in this field. Evaluate Sri Lanka has collaborated with SLEVA and the Center for Evaluation in the University of Jayawardhanepura in organizing monthly webinars on various topics by experts in the field, developing competencies, framework for evaluators, and training workshops for young evaluators. Similarly, Evaluate India collaborated with Evaluation Community of India, partnered with other VOPs like APIA and SLEVA, Evaluate Sri Lanka, and some other organizations in their joint activities like webinars, training workshops like APIA's winter and summer schools. It also works with the Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office in Government of India, NITI Aayog, and other stakeholders in building a national evaluation ecosystem. A very significant activity I would like to put forth was that Evaluate India this year had conducted evaluation case competitions among students of highly ranked educational institutions. In response to this IFP, 44 teams of youth submitted their proposals on a climate change project, which were evaluated by a panel of 7 experts to select the top teams. Prior to the competition, these groups were mentored through 2 webinars on the basics of evaluation and on digital methods. The best team is being mentored to participate in the international case competition. Evaluate India members are working as proactive volunteers in several activities. It is noteworthy to mention, as I said earlier in my earlier slides, that Evaluation Committee of India have taken 2 of the members of Evaluate India as co-leaders in decision-making process. The Evaluate South Africa tries to promote engagement of YEs by identifying institutions that encourage engagement of YEs interested in hosting M&E interns, and they are maintaining an online database of such institutions. They also publicize various training opportunities in evaluation. So while adopting a regional strategy of Asia Pacific region, one action area included promoting young and emerging evaluators as well. This aimed at increasing engagement by young and emerging evaluators in BOPs, evaluation organizations, teams, and commissions expanded availability and accessibility of capacity building, career development courses to build knowledge, attitude, skills, and practice of YAs. And an action plan has also been prepared to implement this strategy. Such efforts will no doubt raising awareness amongst evaluation commissioners about the importance of involving YAs and creating a conducive environment with opportunities for YAs. Next slide, please. So this is my thank you slides. I really thank you all for a patient listening. We'll be happy to take your observations and questions. Now the YAs have themselves to decide what can they do, where they want their involvement and how. I will be happy if some of you share your views on this, that what you want to do and how you will be contributing as young and emerging evaluators. That would be wonderful. Thank you very much once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashmiji. Thank you for laying out how the map of the whole YA's involvement is sort of crafted out from the global to the national level. I am happy to take more any questions around that. If you want to know more about how can you participate, whom want to reach out to, how to talk to, what role you can play, Rashmiji will be more than happy to answer those questions.
Anirudh, I can see one question in the chat box.
Yeah, please
one person has asked that I'm studying engineering, would like how to join with M&D career path. So all of us can give their observations on this, but I would like to comment on this, that monitoring and evaluation is an interdisciplinary field which take into account various disciplines. For example, it started with audit and accounts. It also takes theories of economics. It is also related to behavior change. So it is related to psychology as well, or other social sciences. Similarly, if you are studying engineering, this is more important, that whatever projects you are implementing in engineering side, you should be able, you should have some kind of basic knowledge of monitoring and evaluation, and you can also come as a monitor of your projects, and also you can evaluate from time to time that what objectives you set in, what was your timeline, what impact you were looking with a specific project. So if anybody who is studying in any kind of discipline can join this field, and they can learn this and go forward with this. I mean, you may not take it as a full-fledged career, but it will help you in execution of your duties if you want. Thank you.
Anirudh, there is one question from my presentation.
Please go ahead. Please.
I think before that, there is someone else is asking for Rashmi. How can I speak? Perhaps after Rashmi, I will come on that.
Okay.
Last, there is a chat box. You read?
Yeah, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it. Do the various evaluation associations, India in particular, have a guideline so that specifies standards in a document somewhere that is available? Rashmiji?
Which question you said?
From Shantanu.
Okay. Actually, yeah, some WOPEs have specific guidelines and how you can join them, and almost all the WOPEs have some kind of standards and guidelines with them, that how you can join those, and you can be mentored also if you, and you can tell your needs of mentorship. For example, even Evaluation Committee of India, I mean, they sometimes these guidelines are very explicit, sometimes they are implicit, but when you have to join any specific WOPE, you have to look at the specific guidelines, and accordingly you can join. As I gave you some criteria that who are young evaluators or who can do that, I mean, you should be in the development sector you should have some technical knowledge in the evaluation field, or you should be working in the evaluation field. So it's quite flexible. And similarly, the WOPEs are also flexible. If you want to join any WOPE, you can apply for that and you can take the membership. Thank you. Anybody wants to add?
There is also another question. As experienced evaluators, what kind of challenges do you think would YEs have? What support would you require from us? I think Malika can also come in. Malika, yeah.
Yeah, Malika ji can speak. Yeah.
Can you repeat that question, please?
As experienced, sorry, Anirudh, can I read it?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
As experienced evaluators, what kind of challenges do you think would YEs have for those who may be beginning this journey? What support would you require from us? Okay, so require from us means require from the youth. They are asking, young and emerging evaluators.
Looks like that, no?
Yeah.
Yes. So what we require from the young and emerging evaluators or the youth is their willingness to learn. Sometimes a lot of people think, oh, what is this? These people come and talk and go. There's nothing much for us to get engaged in. We have to have a kind of attitude, positive attitudes towards learning itself. Then only we can open the pathway to show how evaluation can help. And evaluation being a cross-cutting issue, running through all projects, programs, or even your own personality, personal life, it's cross-cutting. But the essence of it is to say that because of this experience, I have learned this. Because of others' experience, they have brought out these examples. And if we learn from them, we don't have to repeat the mistakes over and over again. Because the learning from others adds to our own knowledge and experience. So what I feel is young evaluators must develop an open mind to learn. That means it's not only from seniors, but also from juniors. You know, there are very good examples. If I can just capture something from the Buddha's words in this philosophy, even a little child who's about 7 years old said, "Noble Reverend Sir, your robe is getting dirty by work because it's dragging on the floor." He never said, "Who are you to talk to me like that?" He said, "Thank you very much. I didn't realize it," and appreciated it. So even a little child can show you something, but you must be free and open enough to understand from that point of view. In other words, willingness to learn is what helps.
Yeah.
I can see here one question: what kind of skills are valued in the evaluation space?
Yeah.
I think one has to be a very good listener, and already Malika ji said that you should have you should be open-minded and eager to learn. And also you should have an empathetic attitude, and you should be a good communicator.
Yes.
And you have to follow basic ethical standards that are very important in evaluation field. This is what I would like to add, and others can tell other things.
To add to what Rashmi is saying, we are having a certain section on ethics of evaluation. So that will open out to some of the issues that you are coming up with.
I think if we can just take on a couple of more questions over here, which is there. Just wanting to just be aware of the time and connect with the people, all the questions, and the people go get back with answers from this to the various people who have asked those questions, definitely. And this is a question coming from Bilal from Pakistan, actually. He's asked, is there any kind of forum where we could post our questions on regular basis, get answers from seniors and experienced evaluators?
Can I?
Go ahead, Jill, I answer that maybe.
I think that's at least Rashmi and Malika can say. But as far as I see, the question is a very, very valid suggestion. I would take it as a suggestion. As Mr. Bilal, as you see that we are in the process of forming and strengthening YEs and South Asia. So it's not just a kind of one-off training and just get off from there. We want to have a regular interactions with the YE group members. So in that sense, it's a good suggestion for us to open up a kind of interactive forum in different ways. So we will take it up and see how this can be really kind of, in an interactive way, we can kind of take it up over country.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah, to add to what Chella was saying,
Yeah.
Anuruddha,
Go
can
ahead, go
I?
ahead. Yes, please go ahead, Malika ji.
The floor is open. And if you come up with suggestions of this nature, we will see how we can follow up after the 4 technical sessions. As I see, the 4 technical sessions that we have planned for you, for the YEEs, really tries to cover the overall perspectives, but it may not be deep enough for someone to grasp the insights from it. So if there's a request that comes, we will be available, at least the Young and Emerging Evaluators Forum attached to South Asia. We will be attending to questions coming from South Asian countries. But that doesn't mean, as Rashmi in her interpretation said, it doesn't mean that it's only limited to South Asia. We can also learn from what is happening in West Asia, East Asia, Europe, South America, and the African countries. They all have evaluation societies. So from time to time, we may be able to even interact going out of the Asian region. But starting work from the Asian region, what is helpful is, this is where we are born and this is where we live. And we know to a certain extent the questions that we are confronted with. So that way we can relate very specifically within the region. But outside the region, there may be things that we can learn. But if you take a country like India, for example, it's so vast. And I think there is no common rule where we can practice almost the same way. If you take the Kerala area, they are more educated and they have a very different way of looking at things. And then if you go to Maharashtra, that also, sometimes it is a result of the physical surroundings itself, which creates certain impressions in people's minds on how to interact with problems that are coming up from nature. So that way we have to be open-minded. We cannot say this is the way to address a certain issue. So it depends on the context, it depends on the age group that are raising that question, it depends on the time of the question being asked. Now, for example, what is applicable to this endemic situation will not be the same as it used to be before. We have to start new thinking, new ways of confronting issues that come up with this pandemic that is with us these days. So it's evolving. And that is why we like to end up saying that learning is lifelong. It is a lifelong process. Thank you.
Anirudh, may I add to the question of Bilal?
Yeah, that was I was thinking, because the Bilal question, the
Okay.
forums are there. Forums are there.
I just wanted to add, Bilal, that there are various networks and people put questions on that, whatever they want to ask, and some or the other person answers that question. Every WOPE has a website. There are also people put their questions, and there are several blogs where people interact and put their questions and people answer that. So, let me tell you that there is one evaluation and gender and what is that? Gender community. Gender and evaluation, GENSA, and also the gender and evaluation community, which is an international community, and several questions are asked there and also a number of times, and people respond to that. So that way there are several social networks where questions are put and people answer to those questions.
Just to give you an example, in Pakistan also, I think the Evaluation Network has a website, and please, you can join that. We can put you in touch with our colleagues over there in Pakistan also. The India chapter does have a very very strong, the network is very strong, and more than 300 odd, I think around 400 people now are part of that network. And, lively exchanges do happen. I post and everybody posts, over there. So there's lively exchanges happen and we share things over there. So yes, it is available, and, there is a lot of scope to exchange ideas, and across South Asia, I think most of the countries, even Nepal has it. So all countries do have their own chapters, and there's network online forums to share and share and learn from it. And you can pose questions over there, definitely.
Anirudh, can I come back to one question where there is pending there? There is Mendes, I think from Sri Lanka, he has asked how the behavioral changes measured in evaluations. If you allow me just to
yes, one short answer, but I will definitely allow.
I think it's a good question actually. So the whole data collection, as you know, this you have quantitative and qualitative. Qualitative, it is very crucial. Qualitative is very crucial, especially from the point of different challenges. When you talk in terms of child rights, or when you talk in terms of human rights, or when you talk in terms of so many kind of the real quality change, the behavioral changes, which are long lasting. So that's very important. Now, how do you really kind of measure that? So the quality changes can be measured even both at the monitoring and the evaluation level. But normally in the framework, we have some indicators. As I said, framework indicators are there against monitoring or evaluations, but it may not be elaborate. Like when I say that how the parents from the point of, my family is suffering from poverty, I need to keep the children also bringing income into that. That's a one kind of attitude. But how do they really kind of change from that attitude to saying, no, the literacy or the education is important for my children, so I will allow my children to go to school. Now, this is the kind of behavioral change that might have happened. Now, how do you really kind of measure that? So there are kind of many intermediate and small indicators which we need to capture that. So this can be evolved during the kind of methodology development during the evaluation. And then, of course, then you can go through a kind of methods of ranking or the kind of objective type. So there are different ways of measuring this quality change, the behavioral changes in evaluation.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chela. I will stop here. And just for the time issues, I think, there were just 2 points which I want to just highlight if all the young evaluators over here, and learning from myself also always. It was great to hear from Dr. Shiv Kumar. The most important thing of an evaluator is, the presentation skills of how to present.
Yes.
If you had listened the first half of it, Dr. Shiv Kumar, how he set the context of what we were going to discuss, what the what, hows, and how, what, and why. So well lucidly the context setting was done. It's one of the things to take back, always to learn and take back from there. And also this whole issue about monitoring, evaluations, these are not two separate compartments. They're very interrelated, and they actually sort of need to work very closely. But a couple of years, last few years, those two compartments are sort of, moving away from each other, as you see. I'll stop at there, but do dig. There are a lot of sites and a lot of places where we can pick up things and learn. There's so many things to learn always. And at this point, I will hand it over to Malika ji for the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Aniruddha, for this excellent moderation that you have done. You have very nicely summarized at each point what we need to take home. So a big thank you to you for taking the time and for being with us for these 2 hours. Well, to the YEEs themselves, I would like to say you have forged ahead and put forward a step. Please don't take it back. Go forward. We have 3 more technical sessions to go. If you bear with us, there will be a substantial amount of learning that might come to you. But that is not the end of the world. You have to keep your open mind to learn every time we make a mistake or we succeed in something. The reasons for it is what is most important. So my great appreciation at this point of time to the resource persons who came forward to share their own experience, life experience, work experience, and their own professionalism to share with these young ones. To Dr. Shivakumar, I must say, it was a wonderful presentation that he did. I wish I had all that written down, but having listened to it, I took some notes. There are excellent observations on how we could learn from evaluation and what matters in evaluation. That is the most important thing, with the diverse aspects that we are called upon to assess. So thank you, Dr. Shivakumar, once again, for being with us and opening our minds to a world of questions that we need to answer. Coming to Chelaya Solomon, chairperson, current chairperson of COSA, I think you did an excellent job as well, bringing in a lot of conceptual material into the discussion. And we have nicely presented in a very, what shall I say, edible form. But still we feel that some of those can be further elaborated in the future sessions that are to come, judging from the questions that came. So thank you, Chella, in no small measure, not only for the presentation, but also the encouragement that you give me personally to go ahead with this program. We have Dr. Rashmi Agrawal, an immense, what shall I say, a source of knowledge for us. And she has been working in the government, non-government sector, with the youth sector, and especially Evaluation Community of India, ECOI. So her being with us adds to the value of this discussion. And for that invaluable value that you brought in to the whole session, I deeply appreciate from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, Rashmi, and I know I can bank on you for any future discussion we might arise out of this and try to carry forward. Then Aniruddha, I can't find words to thank you, because I didn't give you much notice also. It was last minute that we were trying to contact you. And thanks to Chella also, at that point of time, I was thinking who could be a good moderator for us? Because we had a moderator who had to turn down last moment for something else, personal thing that was coming out. So we had to even extend our date by 1 week. And then you came to our rescue. I'm so happy and grateful to you for bringing us this rescue mission also, in a way, when we were desperate trying to find somebody. We wanted a good moderator. It's not just somebody. And you fill that vacuum very well. Thank you in no small measure, Aniruddha. It's lovely to be with you. So thanks everybody, and specifically the participants who are aspiring to be evaluators in the future. And I reiterate the fact that those who complete the 4 sessions will receive a participation certificate which might carry weight for your future. So thank you. Good luck to everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, Shiv, you are still there.
Yeah, I'm here all along. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
It's
Thank you,
always
sir.
like that. Even the first session, I remember 1 full hour you were waiting with us.
No, that's fine. That's enjoy.